The runway lights are still glowing when the first orange tongues lick through the darkness. A hangar door breathes fire. Two silhouettes, sleek, predatory, become bonfires, and the night erupts with the sound of Moscow's most expensive alarm clock. Exploding fighters cooking off in their own steel cocoons. In the last 10 days, Russian air power has been ambushed at the source, on the ground, at home, across multiple bases, while a car bomb inside Moscow vaporized a senior general. This is not just a bad week for the Kremlin, it's a message. It says, the runway is no longer safe, and the war has come home. This episode opens in Lipetsk, roughly 320 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, where saboteurs slipped past patrols, picked their way to a protective hangar, and turned Russian air superiority into scrap metal. Ukraine's military intelligence first said a Su-30 and a Su-27 were hit. Follow-on reporting clarified that both burned jets were Su-30SM. Modern two-seat multi-role fighters, Russia can ill afford to keep losing. Kyiv's account emphasized a 2-week prep cycle. Study the guard rotations, learn the patrol route, infiltrate, ignite, exfiltrate. Then they posted the video. In wartime, nothing says we can reach you like a cockpit view of your own jets catching fire. Lipetsk wasn't a one-off. Days earlier, Ukrainian drones hammered Belbek in occupied Crimea, first taking out long-range Nebo SVU radars, a 92 N6 S400 fire control radar, a Pantsir S2, and a fully loaded MiG-31. Then, in a follow-up, hitting two Su-27s on the ground. Radars blind, interceptors burning, fighters damaged. A whole defensive ecosystem punched in the face. If Russia wondered whether the first strike was a fluke, the second answered. Belbek wasn't just hit, it was studied, mapped, and methodically pried open. And the hits didn't stop at Crimea and Lipetsk. In mid-December, Ukrainian sources reported an AN-26 military transport destroyed on the ground at Kacha Airbase near Sevastopol. Another bite taken out of the lift that feeds Russia's fight. This matters because air wars are logistics wars in disguise. Grounded transports are grounded operations. If you can't move bombs and technicians and spares quickly, you don't sortie much. If you don't sortie, you don't scare anybody. Zoom out, and the December pattern looks deliberate. A combined campaign of long-range drones, partisan sabotage, and precision targeting that abused Russia's most dangerous habit, congregating valuable assets under the assumption that distance equals safety. When the war began, deep inland airbases felt untouchable. In late 2025, they feel like open tabs on a saboteur's browser. The Warzone's assessment of Lipetsk's arson strike is especially telling. If a resistance-aligned operative could set two Su-30s ablaze inside a hangar 200 miles from the battlefield, Russia has a force protection problem measured not in brigades, but in habits. As if to underline the nowhere is safe theme, a car exploded in southern Moscow on the morning of December 22nd. The blast killed Lieutenant General Fanil Sarvarov, the head of the General Staff's Operational Training Directorate, precisely the kind of officer whose job is to make sure the machine runs when a country mobilizes. Russian investigators called it murder and said Ukrainian involvement is one line of inquiry. Ukrainian officials stayed quiet. In covert war, silence is a flex. Either way, the symbolism is surgical. The man who trains your ops dies in his own city, and the spectre of reach, your adversary's reach, settles over the capital's parking lots. Let's rewind just a little, because December's bonfires didn't happen in a vacuum. On December 15th, Ukraine's Sea Baby underwater drones punched Novorossiysk, with Kyiv and independent imagery analysts pointing to a Russian submarine damaged at its pier. If you are the officer in charge of strike packages from Crimea or the Black Sea, that's not just another headline, it's a new constraint. Submarines that were once a cleanish way to lob missiles at cities now face a very modern hazard. Low-cost, high-initiative robots that don't fear the dark. The pattern of the month culminated, predictably brutally, in a massive Russian air assault on December 23rd. Hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles slammed Ukraine. killing civilians and knocking out power across multiple regions just before Christmas. Poland and NATO air policing scrambled jets as debris and routes skirted Allied airspace. Moscow's logic was obvious: make the lights go out, make the winter bite, make Kyiv's mayors answer for power stations they don't control. But in doing so, the Kremlin also handed Ukraine a justification for the December spree against Russia's air power at home. If you're going to burn our grid, we're going to burn your jets. If you're still watching, by the way, you're exactly the kind of viewer this channel is built for. The detailed, patient ones who don't just want explosions, you want consequences. So, consider subscribing now so you don't miss the next breakdown. Let's get back to how this changes the game. So, what changed, and why does it feel so sudden? First, the technology curve finally caught up to Russian assumptions. Long-range drones have the legs to reach Western Russia. Partisans and special operations teams have the tradecraft to get inside fences. And Ukrainian targeting has matured from opportunistic to orchestral. Second, Russia's security choices are showing seams. Even Russian mill bloggers concede that guards have been stripped to feed infantry assaults, turning airfields into soft targets with hard equipment. When your security platoon becomes a trench platoon, your hangar becomes a spark away from a headline. Third, there's psychology. For 2 years, Russia sold the domestic audience a story. The special military operation is over there. December told a different story. It's in Lipetsk hangars, in Crimean bases, in a Moscow parking lot. The point is not just to destroy a jet. It's to move the war from an abstraction on TV to a smell in your neighborhood. That's how deterrence works when you lack strategic bombers of your own. You engineer doubt in your opponent's rear. Let's get a bead on the tactical anatomy of these strikes. Belbek's December attack sequence reads like doctrine. Blind the air defense network by killing its eyes, Nebo SVU, and its fire director, 92N6. SWAT the point defense, Pantsir S2, then smash the things those systems exist to protect, the parked aircraft. The follow-up hit on 2 Su-27s is classic: exploit while the enemy is still balancing on one foot. This is what combined arms looks like when your arms are cheap drones and smart reconnaissance, and your main objective is to cause a maintenance crisis that takes weeks, not hours, to fix. At Lipetsk, sabotage was the weapon of choice, not swarming drones. That makes sense. Air defense can SWAT drones, but it can't shoot a mechanic with a lighter. Attackers studied the guard changes, slipped in, lit the jets, and walked out. It's unglamorous, high-risk, low-signature warfare, closer to a heist than an air raid. Yet the effect is the same on a spreadsheet. 2 Su-30s unavailable, air tasking orders rewritten, spare parts pulled from somewhere else, commanders explaining to someone in Moscow why the protected hangar looked so flammable. Also, fair to say, the saboteurs probably didn't sign the logbook on the way out. Now count the December tally that started this narrative. 1. An-26, a MiG-31, 3 Su-27s, and 2 Su-30 destroyed or damaged on the ground within roughly 10 days, with additional radars and launchers toasted in the mix. That's not a bad patch. That's one of the ugliest short windows for Russia's air arm since the invasion began. Made worse because these weren't pilots shot down over the front, these were assets caught parked and supposedly secure. Even if every Russian number cruncher downplays the damage, planners cannot ignore the new math. The deeper you park, the more it hurts when you still get hit. You can see Russia trying to adapt. There's talk of dispersal, moving aircraft to more fields further apart, of building or improving hardened shelters, of beefing up patrols, of stringing more counter-drone jammers and adding more Pantsirs around high-value bases. The problem is that every layer costs rubles, manpower and attention. And 2025 Russia is already spending over 6% of GDP on defense while fighting a grinding land war. Concrete doesn't pour itself, and crews that guard airfields don't fight in Kupiansk. Every pilot who can't sleep on base because he's guarding a gate is a pilot not resting for the next sortie. Meanwhile, the strategic bomber episode from earlier this year, when Ukrainian drones mauled Tu-95 and Tu-22 M3 fleets at a pair of long-range bases looms in the background like a grim reminder. Back then, analysts suggested up to 10% of Russia's strategic bombers were damaged in a single weekend. December's tempo tells us that wasn't a one-time miracle, it was a preview. The tools keep improving and the target set keeps expanding. There's also a maritime echo. The Novorossiysk submarine strike demonstrates that deep rear is an outdated concept for ships and subs too. Harbours that once served as sanctuaries now look like bowls where precision-guided sharks can feed. Naval News tracked a string of sea drone hits this season, from shadow fleet tankers to naval targets, which helps explain why Russia keeps shifting assets and hyping coastal defences. You can move the fleet east, you can add booms and nets, but you can't uninvent the robot boat that wants to kiss your hull. Operationally, knock-on effects ripple in 3 directions. 1. Tempo. Losing jets on the ground reduces sortie generation more than battlefield shootdowns because the maintenance flow is disrupted at the hub. 2. Posture. Airfields pull more security and more counter-drone assets to the rear, leaving fewer to escort ground units and fewer to cover power projection raids. 3. Politics. The Kremlin has to reassure a domestic audience that keeps hearing "we're safe," while parking lot explosions argue the opposite. The car bomb that killed Lieutenant General Serverov is a psychological operation wrapped in a homicide case file. The fact pattern may be disputed, the anxiety isn't. And then there's decision time for Russian commanders. Do they cluster aircraft under the protection of layered air defenses that have already been picked apart? Do they scatter jets to smaller fields with less infrastructure, trading survivability for sustainment? Do they accept that some bases will burn and try to outproduce losses? None of these choices are good, and all of them require time and money that Ukraine is trying to make more expensive by the week. That's what this campaign is, a time tax on Russian air power. For Ukraine, the logic is equally clear. They can't match Russia's raw numbers in fighters and bombers, so they attack the plumbing, the radars that see, the launchers that shoot, the jets that launch those missiles, the submarines that sneak them close. These are low-cost hits with high friction yield, and they're cumulative. Kill a MiG-31 today, and maybe you save a transformer yard next month. Wreck a Su-30SM tonight, and maybe tomorrow's strike package arrives light, late, or not at all. Is there a ceiling to this? Russia is learning. Expect more decoys on aprons, more fake heat signatures, more dummy radars to soak up the first wave. Expect more hardening and more dispersal. Above all, expect counterintelligence crackdowns, as commanders realize their biggest vulnerability might not be in the sky, but in the airfield cafeteria, where a new hire knows a little too much about guard shifts. The saboteur problem is hard because it looks like a people problem, and the people you need to vet are the same people you need to fix your jets. One reason December feels so consequential is timing. As the winter energy war ramps up, witness the December 23rd barrage and the nationwide blackouts, Kyiv is signalling that terrorizing the grid carries a price inside Russia. Western publics track blackouts, Russian publics track flaming jets. Both are theatre, both are real, and both are designed to move political needles in capitals where patience is a resource, and elections, negotiations, and sanctions regimes are calendars, not slogans. We should also be honest about fog and propaganda. Kyiv has every incentive to showcase hits. Moscow has every incentive to minimize them. That's why geolocated video, satellite imagery, and third-party reporting matter. December strikes are not just telegram flexes. They're corroborated across multiple outlets with imagery and follow-up, and they align with a consistent campaign logic. Suppress the systems that hurt Ukrainian cities, force Russia to dilute its defenses, and turn the home front into a place where the war cannot be ignored. If you're counting lessons here, there are 3. First, war has migrated from the front lines to the flight lines. The most decisive air battles of this winter may be decided by who guards a gate or who studies a shift schedule, not by who wins a dogfight. Second, dispersion and deception are the new kings. The side that treats every runway like a trap and every hangar like a target will last longer. Third, cheap autonomy at scale, flying or swimming, has attacked the assumption that expensive assets sleep safely far from the front. They don't. Not anymore. All of this brings us back to our title. Russia's Air Force is burning. In the past 10 days, we've seen jets ignite in hangars, radars turned into scrap, and a general reduced to a headline by an undercarriage bomb. Moscow can and will strike back at Ukraine's energy lifelines, but wars of exhaustion are won by those who can make the other side spend more to do less. December suggests Ukraine has found a way to do exactly that, turning distance into vulnerability, routine into risk, and silence into a weapon. The runway war has begun, and the winter will decide who can keep their birds in the air. Context matters though, so let's close with how this reshapes the larger map. If you are a Russian pilot, your mission brief just got longer, and your sleep just got lighter. If you're a Ukrainian planner, your best weapons may be intel and imagination. If you're a European utility manager, you're bracing for rolling blackouts, while hoping the next strike package from Russia is thinner, because the last sabotage run in Lipetsk worked. And if you're the colonel with a dozen pristine Su-30SMs parked wingtip to wingtip, you're spending your New Year's Eve with a bulldozer, carving revetments out of frozen ground and wondering how much fuel it takes to sleep with the jets spaced 2 football fields apart. Happy holidays. One more truth, because this is how the story will be written months from now. The winter of 2025 to 26 won't be remembered for a single decisive battle on the front. It will be remembered for a string of nights when anonymous hands turned expensive assets into proof that distance is dead. Lipetsk, Belbek, Novorossiysk, a Moscow parking lot at 7 a.m. A string of sparks that, together, lit up a bigger idea. You can't bomb a country into submission if you can't keep your aircraft from burning at home. Because, as a certain anonymous saboteur might say on the way out of a hangar, nice jet, be a shame if someone studied your guard schedule. And for Russia's Air Force, that's the punchline no one's laughing at. Still, there's a final caveat worth holding in mind. Prolonged campaigns of sabotage tend to escalate countermeasures and collateral. Urban security dragnets, new laws, and fraying nerves could make Russian cities tighter, jumpier places. Ukraine's operators will need to stay precise and disciplined, because effectiveness without restraint is just entropy in uniform. The other side of that coin, restraint without effectiveness, is just a press release. December suggests Kyiv is threading that needle, for now. The question hanging over January is not, can Ukraine keep doing this? It's, can Russia keep absorbing this without rewriting its playbook? Dispersal, hardening, manpower reallocation, counterintelligence purges. None of that is fast, and none of it is cheap. If the runway war continues, the Kremlin will face a choice between accepting a slower, more brittle air campaign or paying a domestic price to protect the bases that launch it. Either way, the war has moved into the places Russia thought were quiet. The sound you hear is the ignition of a lesson. Air power begins and ends on the ground, and the ground just caught fire. Somewhere in Lipetsk, a safety officer is updating the risk matrix under open flame near high-value assets. He's writing, in very large letters, "Don't."